Hello everyone, welcome to another whiteboard discussion. Today I want to talk about Jupyter Notebooks. Let me get this out on the board here so you can see what I'm talking about. Jupyter Notebooks and why I'm thinking about it, and so I don't forget. The URL to find all these is jupyter.org. So you can go there if you want to look at things while I'm talking on the whiteboard here and look at some example Jupyter notebooks that are out there. In fact, they actually have it set up so that if you go to jupyter.org and you follow the links, you can interactively through your browser actually play with Jupyter if you've never been there before, never seen it or used it. Now, while you're doing that, because you probably followed the link while I'm talking, let me introduce what Jupyter Notebooks are all about. Now, this is an open source application that can be run in a browser or it can be run locally in an instance, basically, and it allows you to create and share documents that can execute live code, display or perform equations, perform visualizations, and create narrative text. And so in cybersecurity and in threat intelligence, we employ these to perform a lot of automation. In fact, you might say with the Jupyter Notebook, it's very fair that we utilize it mostly for its automation points. Definitely. And in addition to automation, if you think about what I said, so it, narrative tech, well, let me just erase this. We already know we're talking about Jupyter Notebooks here. Let's walk this through instead of me just rattling off. So live code. Now, if you're familiar with code, you're a code head or something like that, that's not a big deal. You're like, I run live code from terminal all the time. The key here is that the narrative text injection makes it nice, because we're trying to automate and become efficient. And so this uses a markdown language, which I'll talk about in another time. But essentially, I can execute code in one cell and then combine it with some narrative text and then execute it again. And what I create here is something that's very human readable. Very human readable. And that's important, because frequently you execute these, if you're looking at it in just a raw data view, but you still need to put eyes on it, having a way to execute, let's say, an API to call some data and bring it forth and then inject it into another cell that has some narrative text means I can automate and understand something at the same time. Now, I can do the same thing with the visualization, because I mentioned a couple of these. I could visualize my data, so I could do a data pull and then graph it, pull it into an equation, run some kind of framework on it, whatever I need. I can process it, basically. And the last thing you can do is equations. So if I need to, say, pull an IP address and then understand what its CIDR is or what net range or subrange it might be in, I can perform those equations inside of my Jupyter Notebook and kind of automate it all. And the idea here is that you're trying to really enrich your narrative output. Not just get a data view, but instead of coding something and then having to, in the code, rewrite and structure ASCII so that it makes sense when it's on the screen and give myself inputs, I'm performing it inside of an already pre-structured environment that allows me to execute the live code, inject it into some narrative text, read that, and then take options and continue down. And if need be, cycle back and return to earlier cells and rerun it. It has, like I said, it's this wonderful thing that basically allows you to not only enrich interactive output and create interactive output, but integrate into and actually connect with a lot of your other tools. Because not only can you pull data in here, you can actually push data out or make it available to other things. So if you're performing this kind of operation and you have, say, a large data store that you have to interact with, like your tip, you can actually push from your Jupyter Notebook at any point when you set it up so that it actually integrates with large-scale data tools. So if you have a Palantir or if you have something heavy like Splunk, those kind of things, you can actually move data to and from it just as easily as you can anything else. So your Jupyter Notebook allows you to have automation and have this kind of very functional, very powerful capability. And as I do more of these lectures, I'll dig into that. You'll get more technicals, and we'll actually explore a couple of Jupyter Notebooks together. And I'm going to encourage the audience to actually create their own and share them with us. And I've set up a GitHub to actually store and hold all these so that we can see each other's work. Now, I don't really want to do more on Jupyter right now because there's plenty to see on Jupyter, but it's best to do a walkthrough. For the whiteboard, what I did want to talk about is what's missing sometimes in these discussions. I can expound on how awesome Jupyter Notebook is, But at a certain point, you're like, well, I'm a beginner. What should I be doing with Jupyter? What should my expectation for the work I do in Jupyter Notebook be? And so I think it's reasonable to break down, using the cycle of education we've already started with, the cycle of how we see skill levels from apprentice to junior, into senior, and then to principal, and then finally at SME or architect. What does it look like? What is each one doing at the different tiers? And so let's start with just the apprentice. Let's begin at the beginner's level. You have an apprentice. What should they be doing with their Jupyter Notebook? Well, definitely executing code. They should be doing basically microservice or simple processing. Let me get this out of the way. And I'll put apprentice over here. Apprentice. Okay, what does the apprentice do? They're going to run single action processes. Now that's a fancy way to say you're going to invoke an API. I know I left off the E there. Let's put it in there. Invoke an API, call a service, and I'm going to do them individually, one at a time. So a key example, if I was given an IP address and I had to go enrich that IP address, find out the rest of its constellation. So I've got an IP, I want to know what its CIDR is. I want to know if there's any domains, right? I'm going to draw my constellation, etc. There's several parts to this. I would go to, and in my first cell, take the code I have already set up, input my IP address, and then output would be a constellation. And then I might save that. That's a level that an apprentice is at. Very, very basic interaction. They're not aimed at trying to do more. They're just trying to do simple things, straightforward actions. It doesn't mean you can't grow and do things like the juniors will do. So a junior cybersecurity, junior threat intelligence, they're going to do the same thing, but they're going to actually have more complicated processes. They're going to do multi-service calls, right? They're going to take that IP, enrich it, and then call virus total. So I'm going to run my IP, I'm going to do some enrichment, then I'm going to select virus total, I'm going to run virus total, then I might go to archive.org, and I'm going to run service on archive.org because on virus total I looked at the domains that say had more than say 10 hits. I want to run on archive and see if I can get a copy and pull that back. And you may have more processes. You might go to URL scan and run its API to pull information, right? You have these multiple processes and it's a little more complex. You're not running single microservices together. You're running a bundled set. And you're also, and this is going to be a key differentiator as well, I'm going to go ahead and erase this, is not only you're running more complex processes, but you're going to start saving that data to a database, either locally or you're going to save it to the large data stores you may have access to. And that's going to be a key thing. Your apprentice is just going to run single processes, and one of those processes could indeed be a database, but the junior is where it starts. They have a local database that they're storing things into, so they have a SQLite database that's connected to every call, and as they go through their process, they're going to start making elementary analysis checks on what needs to be pushed up into the tip or what needs to be stored for someone else to process. That's where that begins. And frequently, what you'll find is the apprentice will run something and the output is an IPYD file, and they're going to take that, and this is the part about sharing. I can run a process and take that file and hand it to someone else, and they can rerun my process and add to it. A junior might take that information and actually and say, okay, I need to rerun this, let me enrich it, let me run my processes, let me save that locally and call and store things to run more complex processes against it, do some basic analysis, and then push that to a data store. Or they may pass their file over to a senior, get my S there, who's going to not only do collection, and if I had to categorize things, apprentices are doing collection, juniors are doing collection with a little bit of analysis. Seniors are mostly doing analysis with some reporting. So it starts really growing here. And a senior not only collects and will run and possibly have one or more multiple service collection platforms that are Jupyter Notebooks, but it will also begin performing an analysis phase. So they'll have analysis Jupyter notebooks. So Apprentice will focus on things that are more collection oriented. They may have some very minimal analytical action, but it's all single process. Gets a little more complicated, a little more interactive here at the junior level, where they start saving things locally to perform some transformation, do some minor analysis, and do more robust collection. But in a senior, they really get into, okay, I've got a lot of collection that I've ran on my automation on my Jupyter notebook. I've enriched everything I can. I've gone through some basic steps. Let me move that data over to analysis, pull it into my analysis Jupyter notebook. And if I don't have enough information, I'm going to go back and recollect. And they may have a cycle going. And at the end of this, the enriched narrative allows them to start pushing out a lot of reporting. And they really will emphasize reporting and their understanding of what's going on. And they'll have more of a complete cycle for the intelligence cycle of product. And then your principal utilizes the Jupyter notebooks in a very similar fashion to a senior, but they take on the really heavy part of, one, being your technical expert. So if something doesn't work, or something isn't working like they want, or we need to innovate a new process of some kind to make something function, or apply an analytical process that maybe isn't set up properly, they become your lead for that, and they're also your primary reporter. They may push this down, so there's some crossover at each one of these layers, but your principal starts acting at this point. And they will do the same thing. They have the heavy principal, the principal has the heavy analysis as well. They will get in the weeds, or they will handle some of the harder analysis like border gateway protocol or things like that, where it takes a lot of interactive processes. They may have anywhere from 4 to 10 Jupyter notebooks working in tandem with each other, and they may have a binder set up so that they can automatically create these. There could be a lot of things that's happening with each one. And you will see in many ways the principal and senior will be very, very similar to each other, just that the analysis and reporting is heavier here. You expect them to do all the heavy, hard stuff. They may include a lot more file information, and probably another key differentiator, especially down here at the principal level, is they and to a certain extent seniors will start in utilizing projects that are stored locally. What do I mean by that? So you may have a couple of projects like a Photon search engine, let's say, that you have running headless and it's collecting information and it's separate from your Jupyter Notebook normally, but you can pull that into your Jupyter Notebook cell and actually invoke that Photon or any other project you have stored locally that is useful and pull its results into your Jupyter Notebook and automate it. In fact, that's a key way to pull out results and kind of lay those results out so that you understand what's going on. If you do feed management or if you do news management and you have to report on news or talk through the news for folks at a strategic level, utilizing a Jupyter Notebook in relation to news, pulling the news feeds in, laying out a couple paragraphs of text is a very common thing to do with a Jupyter Notebook. And so you can see that it gets a little blurry up here, but it's really distinguished down here where at the beginners, they're really focused on single stage activity, becomes more complex, multi-stage activity at the junior level, some minor analysis. It really starts picking up at the senior level. Not that they don't do collection, but they really start focusing more on the analysis and reporting piece. And then for principals, it's all analysis and reporting. They may do some minor collection, but not too much. And they're really focusing also, if they need to do some kind of what I would think of as outside enrichment, then they're the ones who are going to pull those projects in and make it available. They may set it up and then push it all the way back down for somebody to run and then bring it back to them. But there's going to be that kind of interaction. So you can see that Jupyter Notebooks can kind of operate at all different levels. Many times they're used kind of simplistically, but they really can be very, very powerful, complex engines all on their own. They're also handy. The fact that you can easily hand off a process in midstream to someone else makes them makes it something that someone else can assume. The fact that you can store everything means it's very repeatable. You can also change parameters really easily and rerun input, so you can store playbook activity inside of these so that you can automate things properly and yet still have the way to expand in a way that maybe even some SOARs can't do. So very, very, very powerful tools. Very powerful tools. So Jupyter Notebooks, I can't really say more about them than I have, other than they're pretty wonderful. And you're going to get used to them because we're going to talk about them. They're going to be a part of a lot of our processes. And in fact, I have placed a place for these. And there's a link that you can find down in the description. But I was not very distinguished in my link, and I'll make sure this is more human readable. But if you go to GitHub, there's a repository I've set up called Here is the Intel. Actually, my Coromir name is in the middle there. So pay attention to the link more than what I've just scribbled on the board, because it'll be more accurate, definitely. So here, I'll just rewrite it. No point being super lazy here. So again, github.com, and then core, C-O-R-U-M-I-R. Here is the intelligence, just like the channel. Wish I had, here is their handwriting, but if you go there, it's already set up. We'll share Jupyter Notebooks there as we move forward. If you have some that you like and you'd like to introduce, share them there. We'll bring them up. I'll talk through them in a video. Maybe we talk through them together. It doesn't matter, but we'll discuss it. And why I'm on there, this particular GitHub repository has a lot of capability in it. You can request videos and whiteboard walkthroughs there as well. So give it a hit if that's what you're interested in. Hopefully this was useful, give you some insight into how we use Jupyter Notebooks at the different levels. And as always, if you like the video, please give it a like. If you like what you see and you're enjoying what's going on, then go ahead and subscribe to our channel. I'll make sure it's worth your time. So we have several hundred more hours of these to go. Everybody teases me about that when I talk about that, but there's so much to talk about on this topic, especially when it comes to Jupyter Notebooks. I hope that you will be as excited as I am to talk about that in the future. So here's hoping you're having a great day.